Much for your time. We have got a two-part session today. The first is focused on revision. We were talking, weren't we, about delivering effective evidence-based revision strategies that encourage students to be more proactive and effective in the way that they sort out their revision and they prepare it and they get ready for it. And this is what we covered last time. We had an activity called the Peloton, which was, I've done loads actually. It's a nice little reflection on where am I up to at the moment? Exactly where am I relative to my peers in the class and what I want to achieve? We talked through an activity called 6 types of goal setting. Uh, Maybe you've had a play with that one. I certainly have, where I've encouraged students to set approach goals rather than avoidance goals. There's a handout to go with that. And then we picked off some where do I start activities. These are the ones for students who tell us, I don't even know where to begin. And they often obfuscate or they start telling us, I don't know how to revise. I don't know how to start. So we had an activity called Will versus Skill. We talked through a note-taking technique called Cornell Notes, which you'll be familiar with. And we quickly looked at Test Your Future Self. I'm going to come back to that today. Rag Rated revisits the 3 Hows of Independent Work. I'm popping back to that one today as well. So we're going to do a little bit of recapping today, as well as some activities which might take you forward. At the end of last session, if I remember correctly, we had an interesting discussion about Cornell Notes. I don't know whether you were there for it, and how to encourage students to engage with note taking in a different way. And it was only after the session that I found this letter. So if this might be an interesting starting point for rewarding specific behaviors. It's an email home to parents. So if any of these activities, I'll come to it in a minute, if any of these activities you think, actually, I want to encourage students' engagement with that, and any of the activities I share with you today, you can use something like this. It's very simple. 3 paragraphs. The student's name gets dropped into the gap there at the start of the 3rd paragraph. And as you can see here, I've opened with, as part of our program to encourage greater levels of independent study, we've been introducing students to a range of evidence-based study skills. And then in the second sentence, you'd be kind of dropping in your theme. A crucial skill we've explored has been effective note taking. For that, you could put effective revision or active recall or whatever it happens to be. Then I go for the specific thing. We've introduced students to the Cornell note-taking system, and we've been experimenting it over the last 6 weeks or so. Feel free to adjust that time period. So you could say, this could be one for next half term. We've been experimenting it since half term. And then the student's name has certainly been one of those students who has engaged this half term, and I've made it clear how impressed I've been. Could I ask you to reinforce this praise at home? This is one that I've used loads with students. I often show it them at the start of a particular program. So bear this in mind. You're breaking up on Friday. You could have next half term 2 or 3 activities that you want them to be really engaging with, or one in particular, and you can say, here's the letter, folks. If you're really on top of your note taking this half term, or if you've really been doing proactive independent study, your parents are getting this email home. Okay, let's have a quick look at it. I often do this with students, by the way. I'll say, let's imagine you get this letter home. And I focus their attention on the 3rd paragraph. And I say, just imagine your mum or your dad reading, I've made it clear how impressed I've been. Could I ask you to reinforce this praise at home? What kind of things might happen? And we often have a nice little kind of positive discussion about, oh my gosh, yeah, that'd be cool. Some of my students are really cynical. I never get letters home, sir. But we're giving them something small and manageable that we can reward here. It's worked really well for me. So as we're looking at today's activities, you might think, I'm going to attach a reward to that one, and I'm going to front it up and make it a big deal as part of next half term. This time, we're going to talk very quickly about 5 possible revision activities you could use, okay? Some of them are familiar. You can see Test Your Future Self there, but I want to come back to it because it's an important one. Some of them you might kind of half remember, but need a quick refresher on. I'll be sending the PowerPoint through to Sean, so all of the slides are yours, all of the videos are yours, so you'll be able to deliver these. And I'm hoping this will take something like half an hour so that we can then talk about the other element of changing behavior, which is going to be getting staff on board as well. Okay. So without further ado, let's dive in. 5 little evidence-based revision strategies you could be teaching your students next half term. First one, COG-P versus COG-A, cognitively passive versus cognitively active. There's a handout that goes with each of these, and Sian's got those, and if she hasn't, she'll let me know, and I'll make sure that you do get a copy. COG-P versus COG-A. Let's introduce this one. This is the work of this particular academic here, Catherine Stanger Hall. She's a biology professor at the University of Georgia, and she runs a fab little experiment to find out whether the way in which you revise impacts on your exam outcomes. So here we go. Let's go at this from the top. Some students are going to study using a cognitively passive approach. There are going to be 5 of those. We'll come to them in a minute. And her other group of students are going to study with a cognitively active approach. There's going to be 5 of those, and we'll come to those. So this is what she does. The 2 sections of her biology class are offered the same instruction. It's her teaching, the same assignments, the same homework, the same feedback. And they're all preparing for the same exam. And look at this one in the middle here that I put in bold. The 2 groups, the passive group and the active group, do not differ in their reported study times. Make a big deal of that when you sell it to kids, this one, because, you can get more out of your revision, not by doing more, but by doing different things in the hours that you've got. So both groups revise for the same amount of time, and here we go at the bottom there. They're preparing for the same exam, 90 identical multiple choice questions, followed by some short answer questions. It's hyperlinked for you at the bottom there as well. Okay. So it's a pretty neat and tidy, well set up study. Off the students go to prepare for their exams. So what do we mean by cognitively active and cognitively passive? To begin with, I like mixing them up. Okay, so we've got 5 passive and 5 active. That's 10 in total. Here they are mixed up. Can you say to your students, untangle these for me and choose the 5 that you think Stanger Hall decided were cognitively passive and the 5 that all the research shows are cognitively active. We won't go through them all, but you can see how this is going to work. The kids are going to look at highlighting key terms during reading, and hopefully they will come down on cognitively passive for that one. You can just do it, it's comfortable. Whereas closing your notes, covering them up and testing how much you can remember, that's cognitively active. It pushes you to do this active recall. Creating and answering your own challenging study questions, well, that's cognitively active, but looking up difficult information in the course textbook and reading it is cognitively passive, and so on. The students work their way through. They can have a nice discussion at this. They're pulling them apart. They eventually come up with 2 groups, and you do the reveal. Here we go. Here are the passive ones. So remember, this group revised for the same amount of time as the others. They're reading their text, they're checking their class notes, they're making some flashcards, they're highlighting key terms. If they ever come across anything difficult, they look it up in the course textbook. The active students have the same amount of time, but they're challenging themselves to ask and explain complex questions. How does it work? Why does it work this way? Lecturing out loud, explaining to an imaginary class. They're creating and answering their study questions, closing their notes. They're drawing and labeling diagrams from memory. That's the crucial thing. And they're setting themselves tests. It's only when they fail on a question, they then check it in their textbook. So a very different approach there. The 2 groups of students go into the same exam. Here's what happens. Cognitively active students score significantly higher on the multiple choice questions, despite the fact that they haven't revised any more than the other group. They score significantly higher on the harder questions that come towards the end of the exam, the higher level questions. In the post-exam interview, it becomes clear they've learned significantly more, including critical thinking skills. And 72% say that they've kind of seen the value of learning that way. What about the passive kids? They've put just as much time into this. Well, they score lower on everything, on the questions, the higher level questions, and all the rest of it, including a smaller proportion feeling that they see the value in it. So not only is it a less effective way to revise, it's kind of less motivating, and it's a little bit more flat in terms of agreeing that it was a valuable experience. So there's no doubt about it, you can say to your students, cognitively active wins. And then their challenge is this. I'd like you to, you can say, here we are together. I'd like you to design a revision session. It's going to be inspired by or use one of the 5 strategies that Stanger Hall suggests. So they've got those 5. And I gave them a little planning sheet like this. How long are you going to revise for? How exactly are you going to revise? How will you know it's been a good session? And they've got that to begin to think, right, I'm going to plan a history revision session. I've got to be inspired by, these things here that Sir's going on about. Here's one example of a student deciding they were going to plan a little 25-minute session. We'd taught them about 25-minute sprints and working screen free for short periods of time. And they've come up with read the textbook and make notes, which is a bit passive, turn the notes into a table and then cover the table up and memorize it. Yeah, that's not bad. That's pretty good. There's our timings. I'm going to read for 7 minutes, 10 minutes working on the table, 8 minutes for my memorization and test, 25-minute revision session right there. How will I know if I've made progress? Well, I'll have done 25 minutes revising. I'll have a table of similarities and differences, and my aim is to remember at least 60% of it. So that, off a very simple revision session, is one of the most active revision sessions this particular student had planned. This was the kind of kid for whom revision meant sitting down and reading my notes until they go in. And what we've got here is something much more engaging and active. So have a go at that one. Very simple one, that cognitively passive versus cognitively active. Next up, study after study shows that students who can explain complex concepts out loud, whilst often answering difficult questions, are the ones who really manage to master their material. And you'll notice that asking repeatedly, how does it work that way and why does it work that way, was part of the cognitively active strategy in the previous study. So I've got an activity here called Teach Your Imaginary Class, or verbal recaps. I must decide what I'm going to call that one. And it's encouraging students to teach out loud. Now, teaching out loud is not a comfortable way of revising. So I have gone big on persuading students to do it this way. All the evidence shows that it's good this way. But they'll say, I don't need to do this, that, or it's much better when I just sit and read my notes. So let's persuade them, shall we, that teaching out loud to an imaginary class is a good way to study. So here we go. We're going to refer, of course, to an expert, as we always do. Here's Dr. Becky Lawson, Cognitive Psychology, Liverpool University. Her particular area of research is this. Lawson's interested in our ability to explain things we think we understand. And I come across this a lot in students. They'll say to me, "Oh, don't worry, sir. I understand the material. I understand the whole course. It's just that when I get to the exam, it all falls out of my head." And that makes me think, actually, do you understand the course well enough to explain it under timed conditions, which is what the exam requires you to do? So we're going to test students' ability to explain things out loud. And Lawson's interested in it too. Here's her study. It's a fabulous one. The kids really enjoy learning about this. What Lawson does is she makes people draw bicycles. Here's her thinking. We all kind of should know how a bike works. We see them regularly. 100% of people see them regularly. 90% of people know how to ride one. And half of people in the UK own one. Bikes are everywhere. So how do bikes work? Draw me a bike. That's what Lawson asks participants to do. In fact, here is an extract from the handout that her participants get. They've got to rate their knowledge on how bikes work from a scale of 1 to 7. 1 meaning not much and 7 meaning lots. And then off you go. Thank you very much. Draw me a bike. And make your students do it. It's fun. It's disastrous as well, by the way. It is so hard to do. There's lots of laughter. There's lots of, oh God, this is harder than I thought. Here's what they'll do. So watch out for this. They start with 2 wheels, super confidently. Yeah, no problem. Those 2 circles go in. And then they slow down. And then there's looks of panic as they try and think, oh my God. Some of them put spokes in just to bide their time. And it's very funny to watch. And they start off confidently. I understand bikes. And pretty quickly, they realize I don't. I like to stop them at that point, all right, so that we don't end up with complete humiliation. You say, have I made my point? It's harder than it looks. I've got a lovely video for you here of people trying to do it. It's extremely hard. So when I send the PowerPoint through to Sean, you'll have this video embedded if you'd like to use it. So often I'll stop people and say, harder than it looks, isn't it? And then we'll have a look at the video. Lots of people making a mess of drawing bikes. Let's just watch the first 30 seconds or so because it's fun.
What, is this a trick?
No, just draw a bicycle.
The seat pad.
I cannot ride a bicycle. I've never owned a bicycle. Really?
Oh, so is it supposed to be like that? Because you have to have something that turns it. So, okay, so this is like one thing.
There's a flag with my initial on it. As far as I'm concerned, that a bike makes.
This is what you think a bicycle looks like?
There's some terrible bikes, really terrible ones. It's a little longer than that. We see lots of people struggling with the hard thinking that goes with it as well. Hang on, how do they work? And that's what Lawson finds as well. She gives every person who's doing it, she gives them that to start with. You would not have thought people could make a mess of it from that outline. But this is what she gets. Look at these terrible bikes, folks, from grown adults who go, yeah, I understand how a bike works. So it's really worth pointing out some of the flaws that we see in these pictures. We have got two bikes whose pedals are attached to the front wheel like little tricycles. All four of these bikes connect the front and the back wheel with a chain, making it impossible to steer. One of the bikes has pedals that aren't connected to the chain in any way, but spin pointlessly above it, and so on. We can all have a laugh at how terrible these bikes are. And Lawson's conclusion is people just really don't know how bikes function at all, even though they say they do. There's some really lovely post-test comments as well. She collects all of these people going, actually, thinking about it in more detail, I realized I had no idea about its structure. I thought I knew more about the workings than I actually did. This is exactly what our students feel like. They tell us, oh yeah, I know that stuff. I'm bang on top of it. And so we give them the challenge. Okay, just explain it out loud to me. And the wheels come off. They can't do it. So what I do with this activity is challenge them to choose a section of a course and to plan a short lecture about it. Okay? Because I try and persuade them, we're going to discover how much we know about something when we try and explain it to other people. Get students together in pairs, teaching a short or planning. You know, if you're in a classroom, you could say, so you two, I want you to deal with this part of the course. You four, you're working together to deal with this part of the course. And I give them this outline. Okay, you're going to use this structure to lecture out loud to us. Do it as if you're a teacher. You know, this afternoon I'm going to be talking you through, and you introduce the topic. This part of the course is crucial because you would not believe how hard they find that. All right. But what you're asking them to do is justify why this is on the syllabus. So they really have a good fight, a discussion backwards and forwards. Why do we do this in history? Why is this important? Or why is this important in chemistry? They really start getting to grips with, yeah, because if we didn't know this, we wouldn't be able to study this or this. So that's worked well. The key definitions or the big ideas, you can use either of those. You'll need to be able to handle are. So they'll often say, so I'm going to be using some complicated terminology here. You're going to need to know this, this, and this. Let's get some definitions down. They find this one really interesting. So you've got to push them on this. Now the exam they've got to say to you is going to ask you to whatever. So pay particular attention to. And then finally, okay, let's get started by looking at. And then they've got to sequence the information and kind of lecture it out loud to you. Some of mine have made little voice note messages of their lectures, which I think is an interesting way of doing it. And I've been able to kind of share little bits of them. Others have had a go at speaking out loud, but they're falling to bits, giggling and laughing. And we've had to kind of stop and give them a moment and try another group. We've kept it quite light-hearted. And then we've set them a challenge. Okay, tonight I'd like you to try and kind of lecture out loud. You peek at your notes very quickly, you double check you know everything, you put them to one side, and then you're going to lecture them out loud, speaking clearly and academically as if to a class. The more you do that, the more confident you are with the material, the more you can answer tricky questions about it. It's a really good evidence-based strategy to consider. That's the second one. Third one, the command verb table. This has been an interesting one for students who are obsessed about just getting to grips with content. As long as I know this topic, they say, I'll be okay. And these are the ones who say, I have to know the topic really well, but when it comes to the exam, I don't know what to write, or my mind goes blank. And it's often because they're not thinking about the task they have to do once they've learnt the material. Okay, I've got a short video that goes with this one here, but we're not going to watch that right now. But feel free to check that out yourself, just to introduce the idea of command verbs. That is what you have to do with the material that you've learnt. So, how does your exam test how you use what you remember? Forget the actual content for a second. Instead, let's look at the tasks you have to complete. Okay, what verb does the exam paper use? This command verb is crucial. And in this particular activity, and the handout goes with it as well, you suggest to students and you challenge them to think about it. You say to them, broadly speaking, exams only ever require you to do 4 things. And you say, do you reckon I've got a decent model here, or am I being a bit simplistic? How accurate is this model? Discuss and criticize. 4 things exams ask you to do. Number 1, they're very keen on you being able to define and describe things, okay? Think about this in terms of your own subject. So often you'll get command verbs like label, annotate, list, define, describe, select, outline, summarize, illustrate with examples. And if they're not asking you to do that, they're asking you to explain how things work or show you can use them. So comment on, determine, demonstrate, calculate, show, prove, verify, consider, translate, correct. Showing that you can use something and kind of explaining how it works via that process. Group 3. If you're not being asked to define, describe, or explain, often it's zooming into detail and analysing why things work the way they do. You're going to get verbs like analyse, examine, distinguish between, survey, review, investigate. Okay, so I think that's an interesting group. And if you're not asked to do that, you might be asked to do this one. Make judgments about things and justify opinions. Discuss, evaluate, assess, argue, criticise, suggest, predict. Okay, so the kids have seen them all, and you say, what do you reckon? Does that describe our subject? Let's have a think about it. When we do an exam, which ones do we kind of do more or less of? And there's a really good discussion to be had about this. Next activity, here's an exam paper. Let's go through every verb. What does this exam tend to ask us to do? All right, and then, oh, look, in the early stages of the paper, we do a lot of kind of defining and describing. But as the paper gets more complicated, we have to discuss or evaluate, or we have to analyze. That's interesting. And then what students quickly begin to figure out is, could I do a revision session where instead of just passively reading my material, I focus on labeling and annotating diagrams? So that's what we've been doing here. Design a session where your aim is to get better at labeling and annotating. What could you do? And then the students go, well, all right, yeah, I suppose I could have a look at a well-labeled or annotated diagram. Then I could close it, try and memorize it and draw it from memory. Great, good session. Why don't we have a go at that? What would that work for? Well, you say, what about a session where your aim is to get better at argue or justify? Well, I could plan an essay, I suppose, couldn't I? And then I could try and write the opening paragraph. And this has been really good for getting students to think not about the topics and can I remember everything, but what's the exam going to ask me to do once I'm in? One final thing with this activity that I've enjoyed doing is students telling me the model is wrong. That's great. It's too simple, sir. Or I do physics and there's a 5th group that you haven't got. Oh, that's brilliant. If they ever suggest that, You say, fabulous. Why don't we try and organize it a little better? Do you think it's too simplistic? What else could we add? And what we're ending up with there is a really good, interesting, strategic discussion of command verbs. All right. What do exams ask us to do? And it's much better than memorizing information and regurgitating it. So have a go at that one. It's good fun, that. Now, we covered Test Your Future Self last time, but I just want to re-emphasize this one because I was recently doing a piece of work with a school. And this is what I was going through some revision strategies, and we got to Test Your Future Self. And I was talking about the importance of active recall. We see it up and down schools nowadays, the importance of retrieval practice. All the kids are going to be regularly tested. And it got me thinking that what I felt doing that piece of staff training was staff saying, you know, and in fact, some of them were very explicit about it, but I could feel it in the room. And then during the break, when they came to speak to me, we haven't got time for this retrieval practice. I haven't got time to set tests. I can't set 100 tests a year. Or, you know, people say I should be doing a test every Friday and then mark. I haven't got time to set tests and mark tests. So I really want to be clear on this. This is these are activities for students to do. Students should be testing themselves. Okay, it's not on us necessarily to design 200 tests that they can access that we then have to mark. So a quick reminder of Test Your Future Self. Students can set themselves a test and take it as long as the gap means that they've kind of half forgotten what they put in their test. So it's worked really well for me. Give it a go. You get to the end of a topic with your students, and you say, right, in fact, you could do it this week, couldn't you? And then they'll forget over half term, and they can take the test after half term. You wrap up a topic this week, and you say, okay, here we go. I'd like you to set your future self a test. All right. What should your test look like? You can say, well, that's up to you. I'm going to give you a little bit of freedom, but here's some suggestions I'd like you to reflect on. We're going to start with this question. If my future self recalled this material perfectly, what would they know? Let's just establish, what do we want in this test? Okay, what's the list of things that we want in there? And that's a good activity to do with them. The second suggestion I've made for them is we're going to have something like 10 questions, and they're going to go from easy to hard. Leave your toughest questions until last. That gives them a kind of opportunity to think metacognitively about, okay, if I was designing an exam, what would it look like? I like giving them this third piece of advice. Why don't we get some definitions tested early on? The whats and the whens. And then we'll move towards hows and whys a little bit later on. Okay. And then number 5 has worked well. Let's finish with a tricky question which replicates something that a real exam might ask us. And then they finish with number 6. I let them write us a note to their future self. Often there's a lot of sniggering at this, but it's fun. Make a note of, say, hello, future me. Hope you enjoyed half term. Here's your test. I'd be happy if you got 6 out of 10 on this or what. And they write themselves a little note. And that's it. You take them in. They go off for half term for a week. They have totally forgotten they've done this activity. And I swear you hand it out again after half term and say, before we carry on, you're taking a mini exam. And they go, what? You set this. And it comes back vaguely. Oh, God, so I did. And they're often furious with their past selves at how hard their test is. But they have 10 minutes or 15 minutes. They really sit down and try and get to grips with it. And then what I've been trying to encourage my students to do is at the end of each revision session, if you think you've got a topic really sorted, do this activity, just 10 minutes, set your future self a test, and then put that topic away for 2 weeks. And when you next come back to it, your first job is to pass the exam you set yourself. Okay. That, I think, has had a lot of impact on students I'm working with and has been better than teachers pedaling even faster, setting test after test after test, because the student feels kind of engaged in the process. And I've got a little extension to Test Your Future Self that I've been working on with some students recently, and that's gone down quite well. So we've got one more to do, and then I've got this kind of second half of material to consider. It's called the Overnight Boost. Okay. And I think this is one to do a little closer to the exam. Here's our expert. This is French psychologist Stephanie Matza, University of Lyon. And it's a great little study. Matza's interested in whether the time of day we revise has an impact on our ability to remember what we've studied. Okay, so here's what she does. She gets a load of kids to revise some material. And to make it fair, she teaches them something that none of them know about. So there's no advantage to the mathematician who's already doing really well, or the historian, that they're learning Swahili. Okay, here they are, the Swahili words they've got to learn. And Swahili is not a Latinate language. You've got no advantage as a French speaker. You can't figure this stuff out. You've got to get your head in there and get it learned. Okay. So here's what she does. Group 1, revise at 9 p.m. Go to sleep and take a test at 9 a.m. Perhaps a test they've set themselves. Group 2, revise at 9 a.m. Get on with their day and then take their test at 9 p.m. And it's really interesting to see what happens. Okay. So the sleep group are the ones who sleep before their test, and the wake group are the ones who are awake all day before their test. So exam 1 is 12 hours after they've done their Swahili study. This is what happens. The sleep group score significantly higher than the wake group. Then a week later, they come back and they have a little recap on their Swahili words, very quick recap. And then they take their exams either in the morning or at night. Look how they've improved because they've kind of recapped it and done the heavy lifting. And look at the sleep group now. They're really strong. And then just to test the kind of longevity of this, 6 months later, they have a little Swahili recap and then they take the exam. And the memories have eroded over that period of time. But the sleep group again beating the wake group. And the conclusion that the psychologists come to is that there's a lot of mental chatter if you're in the wake group. You do your revision, but then you've got the psychological kind of challenges of coping with a full day. All the time, your memory trying to establish these kind of long-term memory, whereas the sleep group, the memory goes in and then they rest. And the subconscious has lots of time to work through that material. So I've been working with some students to persuade them to do an overnight boost, not every night and not with every subject, but you're going to choose a hard to remember topic, one that's been getting you down a little bit, that you really need, that really needs a special boost. Okay. You're going to do 2 25-minute bursts on it at around about 8 to 9 o'clock. Doesn't have to be 9 p.m. like the experiment I say here, but you don't want further stimulus before you go to bed. All right. So you do it, 8-ish, 7:30, 9 o'clock, and then you avoid doing anything major after that. You pack away, you take it easy, have a shower, you go to bed. In the morning, you're going to do your test your future self activity, and you're going to complete the little test you left yourself the previous night, and you make a note of your score. This has been a really useful one for students who've just tried to get to grips with little knotty sections of the course that they find hard. So they finish with this. Which of your topics most need an overnight boost? We're going to pick one that's small enough to study in an hour, involves important definitions, concepts, and information that you're finding tough. All right, we're going to push ourselves, and one that you can test yourself on quickly and effectively the morning after. And I've had a little group that have decided, yeah, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to give it a try. So teach them that one and encourage them to start thinking about that. It's been really good. Schedule one night per week when you revisit the topic with an overnight boost. So give that one a go as well. So there you go. 5 little short activities to consider delivering. All right. Now, I gave you, I think, 6 or 7 last time. We've got a few more here. So plenty to be thinking about and delivering to students. And you don't have to do them all. And Sean and I earlier were talking about what else could we cover during this session. And we began thinking, well, I think there's one or two other things about encouraging other staff to get involved that we could cover today. Okay. So rather than just letting you tootle off now and think, how can I make this work in my classroom? You might want to consider, how could I engage others in using strategies like this so that more than just my kids become better at revising effectively, and we begin to create a culture in which it happens. This is a hyperlink, and it's going to take you to a document. All right, so here we go, the VESPA implementation checklist. Now, of course, it doesn't need to be this project that you use this for. It's a checklist that I've put together to support staff who are just trying to make change happen. All right. You get 21 steps to take, and I've sorted it out by term. So term 1, and it starts September to Christmas, and I give you a set of things to imagine. So when you get your checklist, you'll have to kind of scratch that bit and just think, well, look, I'm in the early stages of a project. Here's what I might do. Okay, so if you want the full document, it's there. But what I'm going to do is show you one or two things that you might want to consider. Here are the first 5 steps. So if you're thinking, yeah, I want to make this kind of happen, or this kind of work, or these kind of activities, the whole of year 11 need these, or maybe all the Seren kids need to hear this, or maybe the whole of year 12 needs something like this. I need impact beyond just me. Here's some things to consider. Right, these are the first 5 steps. I'm not going to take them one at a time. I'm just going to pick a few out. So what about this? What I've found really helpful when you're trying to get a project like this to stick, is to start through discussion, through, as it says here under your leadership role, taking input from others. We're trying to define a problem here, okay? And you're trying to engage staff by discussing that problem with them. Now, this means you find time in your busy schedule where you think, I'm going to bump into X or Y, and we're going to have 20 minutes on this, or I'm going to arrange a brief meeting with that person or that person, and I'm just going to pick their brains about it. And you're going to be really kind of intentional in taking input from them. Here's why this works. If you want to make something change, you're going to face resistance. People like things the way they are, or they like moaning about things the way they are, and they don't want to change them. So that resistance over on the right-hand side of the screen is beaten when these 3 things are bigger than it. So the 3 things are this: dissatisfaction with the current state. That's how to get staff engaged. To say, do you think we face any challenges with students at the moment? Do you think students are revising effectively? Do you reckon our kids are as proactive as they could be? I'm interested in your perspective on this. Do you reckon we've got really effective independent learners here at school? And pretty soon you're going to have staff telling you, well, no, to be honest, I think we've got an issue. And so you're going, that's interesting. Tell me more. And what we're doing now is we're beginning to surface dissatisfaction. Later on, you're going to be able to say, I've been listening to everything that you've been telling me, and it seems clear we've got an issue here. A lot of you have told me there is. Then we can move on to providing a vision of a positive future. What if our kids were more proactive? How might we do that? And then you move on to first steps. Here's some material we could try. Okay. So those early conversations that you could have this week or after half term are important because they begin to surface dissatisfaction. Try this. How are things with this year group? You're ahead of year 10, you're ahead of year 11 or something, or you're in charge of Seren at year 11 or sixth form. Bump into a few staff this week, organise a couple of meetings. I've got a few questions for you. I'm curious. How do you think things are with this year group at the moment? How are the students getting on? What do you reckon are our areas for development? Are our learners as proactive as you'd like? If you had to point to a gap in our provision, what do you think it would be? And you're just making notes and nodding and listening, going, yeah, good point, thanks. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, this has been so useful listening to you. Right, listen out for external justification. this is the bit we're not going to put up with. Well, as you know, all the good kids have gone to the grammar school and we're doomed to perpetual failure. You can't nod and say, yeah, good point. We're doomed. Instead, you can say, well, there are comprehensive schools up and down the country in that circumstance. Of the things we can control, the things we're in control of here, what do you think needs priority? Interesting. Good point. Okay. And a conversation like that repeated 3, 4, 5, 6 times with different members of staff means that you can then feed it back via an email, via a working party, via a meeting. I've been having some interesting conversations with you all over the last 2, 3 weeks. I think there's some patterns emerging that we're going to need to tackle. You're telling me, and then you insert whatever. You might hear students are too passive. They need to be working harder. They don't revise effectively. They lack ambition. And then you can say, you know what, folks, I think you're right. There's something going on here we're going to need to work on. Who's interested in kind of giving me a hand on this? Or X, you mentioned this idea. I think we might need to follow up on that. So-and-so, you were very good. You pointed out this. And so what we're doing now is we're surfacing dissatisfaction and we're building a vision for what it might be differently. Okay. That's a good point to ask for volunteers. Who's up for this? This might be quite an interesting piece of work, mightn't it? Or to tap up 2 or 3 people. I'd love for you to help me out because you're always really good at giving me some clarity and creativity. So try that one. It gives you a much clearer definition of your problem. So that was number 2, defining your problem. I want to show you something else you could try. And this is if you're in the privileged position of running meetings with other staff. Not all of you might be here, but if you do run a meeting, if you can gather your troops together and have a chat with them, here's an agenda item that works really well. It says script below here because there genuinely is a script for it in the handout. You can read, I'll tell you what to say at what point. You don't need that. But I was working with staff who were first-time leaders who found it quite useful. Here's what I told them. Plan meetings like you would lessons. All right. Okay. We're not going to just wander in and do things randomly. So I was working with these young middle leaders and I was saying, you need to be thinking this. You're going to be up at the front, framing the context of this meeting and saying, here's why we're here today. Here's what we're up to. So get 2 or 3 slides ready. Secondly, what do I want them to be thinking about? How do I want them talking? Where are they sitting? How are they recording their ideas? You need to be thinking about all these. They're going to be giving you some information back. So you might be saying, I want you and you working together. Or Steve, Charlie, I think you'll make a good pair. Can you come down and sit here at the front? I've given you this. And you're almost running a little lesson when you run this activity. It's called Glad, Sad, Mad. And it's pretty straightforward, actually. It's a bit cheesy, that, isn't it? Glad, sad, mad, but it works. Glad, all the things you enjoy about your current job, being a 6th form tutor, or being part of the Seren delivery team for me, or working here in year 10, supporting students with me, or whatever it happens to be. All the things you're enjoying. Sad, things that make you feel a bit down. These tend to be intractables, that get you feeling a little bit glum about work. Mad, things that get you frustrated. All right. It's not going to be a moan fest. Off we go. And what you'll find is that you get different lists. You take your lists in at the end. Oh, thanks for this. I'm going to have a little look through them. And then the glad list becomes things, I need to big these up. Staff are really enjoying these. We're going to preserve these positives as we try and change things going forward. Sad often end up as intractable problems or missed opportunities. Often they're things you can't fix, but you find out by implication what's important to staff when they say, we used to have this great tutorial program and we haven't got it anymore. Oh yeah, tell me more about that. Maybe a good tutorial program, something we want back. Should we try and work on that? Mad, frustrations or issues with systems, procedures or policies that you might be able to kind of change. Often you can get some quick wins by saying, no one likes doing this thing. Why are we doing it this way? I've come up with a cleaner, simpler way of doing this so that we can focus our attention on fixing this particular problem. So glad, sad, mad works nicely. By the end of that, you've spoken to a lot of people about the things you're trying to change, and you've even given them a kind of framework to express their feelings. So they're feeling consulted by this point. And you've got to a point now where you can define a personal vision. You can say, I've listened to you all, and going forward, I think these are the things we're going to be focusing on. I always remind myself when I'm leading projects like this, let's remind ourselves of Simon Sinek's work, The Golden Circle. We need to know why we're doing this. We're doing this because, all right, that's your personal vision. A lot of you have told me that students aren't revising effectively or they're not proactive enough. We need to come back to that why. Sometimes in the panic, we tell staff what to do. Listen, folks, you're all doing this, crack on. And we forget to communicate the why. And the why is really important. I did this with a group of staff recently. I've done it loads. It's good fun. You say, okay, we're going to try and define a vision for what success would look like. What would our students look like if they were really firing on all cylinders? You know, let's imagine this future state where things go really well. You're building up a sense of what it would look like if we solved this problem. And they all had post-it notes, and this is a good one. Students who are independent and self-motivated, who know what they want to achieve and how they're going to achieve this and what steps they can take to be successful. Good little meeting this, with staff going, yeah, this is, wouldn't it be great if school was like this? And then, you know, here's another organization I've worked with recently where the staff, we then turned it into a little vision. This is what we're after. Took me ages to get to this because I had 100 post-its to work through. But we did it. We got there and we handed it out. And then they had a chance to say, no, you've not expressed that well, Martin. They all had a little kind of corrections, and I improved it again. But we all signed off on this at the end. This is what we're after. Students with high expectations of themselves who work to develop their aspirations, ambition, and drive. Proactive, independent learners. You might get to something like this. This is what we're after. And once you get to that point, and you might be there in the spring term, you can now handle arguments better, or disagreements better, or obstacles better, because in your head, you've got a really clear sense of what it is that you're trying to do. And people have helped you put it together. And I've worked a lot with head teachers up and down the country, and I've often seen them do this. They're really good at having scripts ready. You know, you meet those senior leaders who can talk really well. It's not just off the top of the head. They've often like rehearsed a little assembly or a speech to staff or a difficult conversation. And I did a lot of rehearsal of, come on, folks, what are we here for if we're not here to make students better at learning proactively? You know, I know it feels difficult at times, but this is what we're after. Or you say, I've been listening to staff and they're all highlighting how dependent some of our learners are. We've got to give them the tools to help themselves. This is the direction of travel. This is what we're after. I've used all of these in the past. Let's have a look at this fourth one. You know, I've used it so often. You know, the students we work with are intellectually capable. Right, every year, thousands and thousands of them kids up and down the country pass these courses. You know, if ours are struggling, they're somehow de-skilled, and we have to teach them how to learn more effectively, or whatever it happens to be. Over the spring term, you know, after Feb half term, if you've had conversations like this, you can begin developing your scripts, and then you've got people who want to come along. And you've got one or two who say, I'm up for this, when you then say, okay, why don't we try this? One final thing. I was coaching some leaders recently, and we were talking about the way in which they delivered to staff. And it occurred to me there's a shift that happens. During discussion, it's okay to use soft language, modal auxiliary verbs. You know, when you're discussing possibilities, you can say, yeah, I'd like us to try to be more this, or wouldn't it be good if we could, or I'm not sure if we've quite got this right yet, or maybe we need to be thinking about all of this kind of language. This conditional language is good during consultation and discussion, but it's not good once we've made our decisions about how we're going to do things differently. That's when we need to shift to clarity. okay, here's what we're going to do. Each week we're going to deliver a 20-minute session. We're all going to do it. Here's what it looks like. Okay, so I think good leadership does this consultation and uses softer language during consultation. But once the decision is made, we're not going to say, I'd really like us to try, if we can, to kind of, if at all possible, to deliver one of these sessions. No, we've moved away from that softer language towards, here's the commitment we're making now, and here's why we're doing it. So one to watch out for that. I've got a few others to consider, but only a few. All right, so we're nearly there. You could design a mini curriculum together with staff. I've just given you 5 activities this time, and like maybe 5 or 6 the last time, so you've got 10. What about sitting down with a group of staff and saying, of these 10, what if we delivered 5 over the next 5 weeks? Which 5 do you think are the most important? And you might have 2 or 3 staff who really want to do that with you. And accept whatever they come up with, even though part of you's thinking, please include this one, or I don't want to do this one, or I think this one's best, or this isn't going to work as well. You want to encourage buy-in by saying, anyone want to help me with this? It's going to be really important. Create an online shared area. It sounds a simple way forward, but as soon as you're saying on the T drive or whatever it is, on the T drive, I've created a new folder and this is where we're going to put all our material. So as soon as you got something that you think works really well, stick it in here. Or I've put you some PowerPoints in here, but I'd love for you to check them through and improve them. Or when you run this one, if you get a better clip or idea or article or stimulus, stick it in the T drive, please. And it'll mean that we can all improve our performance. And then here's another one to consider. You want the project to be successful and you want to be able to demonstrate that success as you're going. So rather than wait, you need to catch people halfway through and say, it's going well, this. And there are a number of ways you can do it. Okay, it's what Jim Collins calls the flywheel effect. Okay. We accumulate visible results. Students seem to start revising differently. And then if we go round clockwise, people line up. Oh, this looks good. Can I join? And your flywheel builds momentum gradually, bit by bit. But you've got to show that we've got a little accumulation of visible results here. And there's loads you could use. Attendance creeps up slightly. Punctuality slightly better at revision sessions, or negative behaviour log entries have dropped slightly as a result of this, or more students are studying proactively in the Library and Learning Resource Centre, or there's more take-up of voluntary activities, whatever it happens to be. Students are revising differently. I sent out a little questionnaire, I've done a focus group, and the kids say they're finding this really helpful. So you want to kind of evidence the success as the project is going on, so to anticipate that kind of dip. So I think that's really well worth it. 1 or 2 other things to consider. If-then planning or a project pre-mortem. This has worked really well. The wheels will come off your project at some point. All right, there's going to be a moment where things don't go as well as you want, or a tutor drops out that you thought was really into it. Well, there'll be some sort of disaster. There always is. So a pre-mortem is your job. It's a strategy in which you imagine, I get this thing set up, but it all falls apart. Why does it fall apart? And you make a list before you begin. Okay, lovely example of pre-mortems in this little video, but we're not going to watch it together now. You can have a look at that when you get the PowerPoint from Sean. But I would do a bit of this. You'd think, okay, what if we got this started, but then my best tutor goes off for 6 weeks? How would I patch that one up? Or what if a staff member complains to me? Or what if I observe a poor session? And you get some of these problems solved early. All right, you've got a little plan for them. I used to do this with my team. And then when the problem came up, there'd be a little bit of Steve was one of my staff, Haley was one of my staff, they'd get excited. Oh, I predicted this one. I told you this would happen. What did we put in that plan? And we'd go through, oh yeah, we said we'd do this if this occurred. So your if then plan in the early stages is really, really useful. It keeps you on track instead of one small obstacle derails the whole thing because I hadn't thought of it. You have thought of it. You've thought of all the obstacles. And then finally, observing and checking compliance is a kind of leadership thing as well. And it's the one I least liked doing. So I had to force myself. Our staff doing what I've told them to do. So you might want to go and watch a session where you drop in with a tutor to double check they're delivering your materials for you. That takes you up to number 16. There's plenty of others though. There's 21 and it's quite a nice little document for you. There's plenty of other suggestions for you there. And since in my teaching career, almost every piece of CPD on leadership I ever took ended with a cheesy video. You've even got a cheesy video to watch on your own time at the end of this as well. Okay. So there you go. 5 more activities to consider, but I hope more importantly, some ways in which you might get the momentum going and the ball rolling after half term. Now, I am at info@vespa.academy and I promise I'll be able to get back to you. If you're running a project and you think, blimey, this isn't going as well as I thought, how do I get this problem solved? Or what do I do next? Or I'm stuck. Just email me, info@vespa.academy, and I'll get in touch. We're also on social @Vespa Mindset. Okay. Right. I'm going to